The three Opus 44 string quartets of Felix Mendelssohn date from a year-long period spanning 1837 and 38, when the composer was 28 years old, about a decade older and wiser than when his first two quartets appeared in print. The three were not composed in the same order in which they appear within the published set, but Mendelssohn was apparently so proud of this joyful-sounding D major masterpiece that he decided to give it publication priority. It's one of those pieces the hearing of which can make one glad to be alive, and it is a joy to take it up today on the second birthday of my dear little buddy Endocene, who sometimes makes cameo appearances in these videos. This is a four-movement work whose movements are couched in D major and its relative minor. I'm going to get right to it, and will mostly let this music speak for itself. You will hear a recording by the Melos Quartet available on the Deutsche Grammophon label. Movement 1 is a D major sonata form movement with a repeated exposition. The musicians in this recording have elected to ignore that indicated repeat. The music begins with an exuberant rocketing figure in the first violin and soon takes on an overtly narrative quality, contributed largely by a continuing flow of eighth notes, 8 per measure, that ties all of the sections together with a mostly unbroken thread of pure melody. There is a great deal of thematic variety over the course of this movement, with each of its sections contributing something significant to an unfolding tale whose meaning we are left free to guess at. Mendelssohn supplied the indication minuet for his second movement, also set in D major, but this music has almost nothing to do with the courtly dance so indicated, but glides effortlessly across the floor with its feet never really contacting the ground. The B minor trio invokes the world of Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, for which a much younger Mendelssohn had written some celebrated incidental music, and the movement's coda brings back some of those fairy shadows as the music finds its D major resting place and subsides there. Movement 3 is utterly remarkable. A B minor troubadour song over a plucked guitar-like accompaniment and a current of rolling 16th notes, heard first in the second violin, that ferries this music along almost uninterrupted throughout its entire length. The pattern of the movement is the one often identified as sonatina, that is, sonata form without a development section. The most remarkable feature of this movement, formally speaking, is the invocation of a convention borrowed from the 18th century concerto, the provision of a cadenza near the end of the movement, set up by a German augmented sixth chord and the second inversion tonic chord that follows. I have identified this as a 6/4 chord in my running commentary. The cadenza that prolongs that chord rises to a peak of real anguish, perhaps disproportionate to the sense of gentle sadness that otherwise prevails in this movement. Let me just mention in passing that this movement would have been very well served by a more faithful observation of the metronome marking that the composer supplied at the movement's beginning. Just saying. The final movement, which returns us to the bright world of D major, is a 12/8-time sonata-form essay that exhibits many unusual formal features. The movement opens with a D major salvo that might be described as ecstatic, followed by a rush of eighth notes and dancing figures that invoke the tarantella, a frenzied dance that appears in other important compositions by this composer, including his second quartet. The formal novelties begin with a fairly long and very harmonically adventurous transition, which disappears entirely during the movement's 2 recapitulations. You heard me right. There is no exposition repeat for this movement, but the second large section, the development plus recap, is in a sense repeated, but in the same way that the exposition of the opening movement of Sibelius's Fifth Symphony is repeated. The repeat is by no means literal, and important rewritings happen the second time through. To summarize, the first development is entirely too short to serve that purpose adequately, and the first recapitulation is distorted by the omission of its transition and the presentation of the first member of the second group in the inexplicable key of B flat major, the quartet's flat submediant key. The composer who had just created this problem solves it in an unforeseen way. Without bringing back the remaining members of that second group, the first recap yields to a considerably longer and much more respectable second development section, and provides a second recapitulation in the proper key, resolving this strange formal puzzle. That second recap does involve some rewriting. For instance, the first theme is presented beginning with its consequent phrase, and its continuation is a variant of what happened in that first recap. In other words, that long and extremely interesting transition heard during the exposition is omitted entirely. The result overall can be heard this way. That first recap, with its second theme set in an unjustifiable key, is actually part of a much larger development section, and the formal result is as unsettling as that frenzied dance thought to be efficacious against spider bites. That was an awfully dry way of describing the unfolding of this thrilling movement, which is as kaleidoscopic as anything Mendelssohn ever wrote. I recommend that you simply abandon yourself as fully as possible to this wonderful music, counting it out at a steady 2 beats per measure, and see if you can resist jumping to your feet and dancing along with this composer during that D major coda that is absolutely thrilling.